Hi everybody, welcome to Bello's Designs. My name is Catherine and today we're going to be making this handmade junk journal. So let's take a quick flip through our journal. We have a couple of pockets in the front. You could add a little notebook or a pad of paper to that, or some cute adorable little tags to write on. I have some antique papers. I'm going to show you where those came from as we move into the video. We have some notepad paper and some coffee dyed paper that looks antique but isn't, but lots of fun to embellish and write on. And if you stick with me, I will show you how to create this journal yourself. Let's talk about what we need to get started. For this project, I have a bookbinding kit that just has a few items in it, and you might even have some of these at your house. So I have some binder clips. I like to use 4. If I was making a bigger journal, I might want more. I have some wax twine that will be tying the signature pages into our journal. We'll be using a ruler to measure out where we're stitching our journal together to make sure everything lines up. I have a pair of scissors that I keep exclusively for my twine. This, I believe, is called an awl, A-W-L, and you could certainly use a paper piercing tool if you have one at home. I like this one for my journals because I can make a pretty large hole with it if I need to, and it's pretty strong, so it's easy to poke through boxes and other things that you might want to make a junk journal out of. I have some needles that have a bigger eye that will fit that twine, and then of course we want a bone folder to make all of our pages nice and crisp. In addition to that, we will be using our Dream-Scape papers, and I have chosen a couple that match my 12 by 12 scrapbook page. We have our 12 by 12 piece of paper. Today I will also be using my scoreboard, which I don't pull out very much. I usually use my paper trimmer because it has a scoring tool on it. But I will also be using my paper trimmer to trim my pages down to size. We're going to need a stamp block. We'll be using our MISTI stamp platform. A couple of stamps from Lavinia. I have the Wild Summer Flower and then Seren. I'll be using a variety of blending brushes. We will also be using our white Posca pen. You'll need a pair of scissors. I have my Wink of Stella. I'll be using my white and black chalk pastel pencils. We'll be using limited inks for this project today. I have VersaFine Clear Nocturn, Lisa Horton Cloud9 ink in Spiced Plum, which matches the papers that I've chosen from my Scenescapes very nicely. And then I have the Cloud9 Anthracite ink. You'll also want to have your hill masks and your moon masks if you have them, or you can create your own. We'll need some different types of papers to create the signatures for our journal. So I have taken apart an old Mead notebook or composition book. It was stitched together, so if you just simply find the middle of your composition book, you'll see that it's stitched together with some thread, and you can just use your scissors to break that thread and pick it out without ripping the pages. And I just find those help to make some really nice signatures. They're already lined, so if you wanted to use your journal for writing, there you go, you have lines to do that. You can use your ink pads to age it if you want to. That's up to you. Maybe you want to make a whole junk journal just using this type of paper. I'll also be using some coffee stained paper. This is super easy to make. All you're going to do is take your pieces of copy paper and your leftover coffee from your pot in the morning, and pour the coffee that's cooled down into a pan, and then just dip your paper in it. Some people will soak it for a long time. I find that I'm able to just put paper in it and then leave it out in the sun to dry. And if you want this to really be archival quality, you can also add a little scoop of baking soda to your coffee, and that will balance the pH so it brings down the acidity level. This is something I found the other day that I thought was really cool, and I went to a used bookstore and I found a very old book. Now, I was looking at the books there, and the copyright page is missing from this book, but the other books that were in similar condition were at least 100 years old, if not older, and I'm guessing that this book probably is very similar. Now, it is a book about, they had some really old Bibles, but it's called The Young People's Bible History, and I was really drawn to it because the pages are nice. The signatures were already falling apart, and so they're easy to reuse and take apart. I think I did pull the twine that was holding these together off so that I could create my pages. And there we go. So they're ready to go. It didn't seem right to use an actual Bible, but it's a book about the Bible, so I think that that's okay. Otherwise, it might have just ended up getting recycled, and I'm not sure who else would want an old book that's falling apart except for somebody making journals. So there we go. Those are all the supplies we're going to need to get started. Oh, and lastly, of course, we don't want to forget our glue press, because you'll need something to glue everything together. All right, I'm going to clean this up and we're going to get started. All right, in order to create the cover, I'm going to use my scoreboard today. I'm also going to be using a ruler, my bone folder to get a nice crisp edge, my scissors to cut off the corners and make it fit together a little nicer, and then a pen in case I need that. So the first step is to score the cover at 1/2 inch down the left side. Then I'm going to turn my paper and I'm going to score it again across the top. And then one last time at 1/2 inch to go down the other side. Finally, we're going to turn it this way and we're going to score at 3.5 inches, and this will be the bottom, and this is what's going to make our pocket. Okay, so we have all 4 of the outside edges are scored. I'm going to turn it back so I have the 1/2 inch score across the top and the 3.5 inches across the bottom, and I want to score right down the middle to make my fold. So I'll score that at 6 inches. We'll move the scoreboard out of the way and bring in the glass mat so that we can get a nice crisp fold. So I'm just going to come back and refold, or use my bone folder to get a nice crisp fold on each of those score lines. all those folds are burnished and they're crisp and ready to work with. The next step is to take the ruler, and I'm going to use my grids on my paper because I want to make sure that the edge that I'm about to cut off is even on both sides. And you can eye this out, but I just like to make sure it's exact. So I'm gonna line it up at an inch from each corner. So I've got it at 1 inch. Here's my corner, 1 inch here and 1 inch here. And then I'm just going to come in. You can use a pencil, you can use a marker. It doesn't really matter because you're going to be folding it in and nobody's going to see that edge anyway. So I'm going to turn it and I'm going to do the other top corner the same way. So lining it up at 1 inch here and 1 inch here from the corner. And just drawing that line across. Okay, now we're going to cut those two pieces away with scissors. All right, so there we have that. The next step is to cut from the score line at the bottom to make that pocket. We want these to be separate, so I'm gonna use my scissors and cut right up from the bottom to that 3.5 inch score line. All right, now that that's done, what I need to do is just make a little tick mark about 1/2 inch. So I've got my slice down here at the bottom, and I'm going to mark it 1/2 inch in from here and 1/2 inch, so 1/2 inch out from each side of that score line. Come right back up here and draw that little line, and we're going to cut those little pieces away. There we go. Go. We'll just move those right out of the way. Now the next part I want to cut off is this corner right here. So I'm just going to mark that for you so you can see what I'm talking about. So I want to cut off just these two bottom corners. We're going to get rid of those spots right there. All right, now we're all trimmed up and we're ready to glue this cover together. So I'm going to come in with my precision glue press and I'm going to use it to glue down the 3 sides. And we're not going to glue the bottom, but we are going to use this side piece to hold that bottom pocket in place. So because I want to be able to tuck things into my pocket, I'm going to make sure that I stay right up to the edge of this side. So there's the side, and I'm going to glue it down. I'm going to use my bone folder just to burnish it and make sure it's nice and tight. And I have a good a good stick right there. Okay. So that side's done. We're going to come over and we'll do this side. Okay, now you can see I have a nice little pocket. I can tuck things in there and it's going to hold it nice and firm on the sides. So let's go ahead and glue down the top and then we'll get started on the stamped piece for the covers. Okay, I've picked 2 coordinating pieces of paper out of my Dream-Scape collection, and I'm going with the purple and the pink because I really love that soft look. And since I'm not making a mermaid journal, when I look at these pieces right here, they almost look like barnacles to me. So I'm going to cut my paper down, and when I do that, I'm going to get rid of these sides. Now, if you wanted to make a mermaid journal, you might choose to keep those. I'm not, however, so I'm going to cut them off. Now our journal cover folded is 5.5 by 8 inches, so we're going to want to cut these down to 7 3/4 inches high, and then I would like to make this 5 1/4 inches wide so that I'll have a nice border around my papers. So I'm going to bring my paper trimmer back in. That all set up. So the first step I'm going to do is just cut off a little bit from this left edge, and then I will turn my paper and make sure that it is 5 1/4 inches, and save these pieces because we can make something with those later. And then I also want it to be 7 3/4 inches tall. So I'm going to trim that down right here. There we go, just a little bit off the top. And we'll do the same thing with this piece here. So I'm just trimming 1/4 inch off the top to make it 7 3/4. And then I'm going to come in and trim about 3/4 of an inch off of one side, and then flip it over because we're getting rid of those barnacles, and we are cutting this down to 5 1/4 inches. So there we go. Now we have our 2 pieces of paper for the cover of our journal. So one will fit on the back and we have a nice border, and the other will fit on the front and we have the same border there. So let's clean this all up, put it away, and we'll take out our stamp supplies and come right back. I'm going to use my MISTI to stamp Seren, and I like the MISTI platform because if I stamp and I don't get a perfect image, I can just simply push my paper right back into the corner again and re-stamp, and I will always get a perfectly stamped image. So we'll be using the VersaFine Clear Nocturn to ink her up. So I see that she didn't come out perfectly, so I'm going to come back in and redo it. I also have a smudge here, so I really don't want to get that on my paper by accident, so we'll wipe that off and come back in, and I just have to ink her up again And if I have to do this 2 or 3 times, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get the perfect stamped image. I like to give it a little bit of a press and give it some time to soak into the paper. Okay. And there's just a couple more spots that could use a little more ink, so I'm going to go ahead and do it one more time. Want to make sure we're actually using the ink side of the pad and not the lid. Works better that way. All right, and there she is, a perfectly stamped image. So we're going to clean this up and come back to stamp the rest of our cover. My focus today is really creating this junk journal, so I'm going to keep our stamping pretty simple. However, at home, you know, you can always embellish and add more to your cover if you decide to make this piece. So what I'm going to do next is ground Seren using my mask. So I finally added the hill mask to my collection, and I'm so happy I did that. All right, I am using the Cloud 9 Spiced Plum, which is almost a perfect match to the purples in this page. Now it's time to create the signature for our journal. So the signature is the pages that are inside, and we're going to sew them all together. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to be making a 20-page journal. So in order to do that, I'm going to need 10 pages of paper. I have a few pieces of coffee stain paper that I made the other day, along with the antique book pages that we painted, and eventually these will be all embellished and we'll have the space in the middle to write. And I've also taken apart just a regular composition notebook and added a few pieces of those pages in here as well. Now, bear in mind that these pages look very white compared to these, but when the journal's finished, we'll have inked up the pages and added tags and pockets and different things like that, so it won't be quite so noticeable, or we won't have such a stark difference in colors. So we're going to go ahead and cut the paper down so that it will fit nicely inside of our journal. Now our journal is 5.5 by 8 inches, so our paper is going to need to be just a little bit smaller I like to have it about a 1/4 inch smaller, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut my paper down using my paper trimmer so that it is 5 1/4 inches wide by 7 3/4 inches high, and that will fit nicely inside of our folder. So I'm gonna do that and come back. So we have our signature pages, and they have been trimmed down and they fit nicely inside of our journal. So the next thing we're going to do is stitch it all together. So what I'm going to do is just make sure all of my pages are lined up, and I want them to be held together really tightly. So I'm going to use my binder clips to make sure that they are nice and tight and ready to go. And we'll do 2 on each side of the pages. So 2 on each side at the top, 2 on each side at the bottom. Now I want to make sure that the stitching in my signature is lined up perfectly, so I'm going to use my ruler just to measure. We know this is 8 inches tall, so I'm going to make a little mark at the 4 inch right here in the middle, and then I'll also do it at 7 inches and 1 inch, just so it's nice and lined up. And I'm also going to take my book, my cover, and I'm going to do the same thing here. So we have it at 8 inches from bottom to top. I'm going to make a little mark at the 4 inch spot, and one at the 1 inch mark, and another at the 7. So right in the middle, and then an inch in from the bottom and 1 inch in from the top. All right, for this part, I'm going to bring my scrap paper back in because I need to have something to protect my work surface. We're going to use our awl to punch the holes in the bottom and the top before we sew our pieces together. It really doesn't take much to push this through the paper, and the paper in our signature is not very thick, so that should go pretty easy too. And you'll feel it go through the paper. There we go. So we have our 3 holes. 1, 2, 3. And now we're going to do the same thing with our signature. That went through, and I'll do it at the bottom. Just checking to make sure it went all the way through. And then once again at the top. Oops, I think it's through because it's stuck to the paper. Yep, there we go. Okay, and this is our antique paper, so we're gonna have to be a little careful with that because it's really delicate. All right, the next step is to measure out our twine, and I want to make sure I have enough to have a nice bow. So I'm going to do 3 times the length of my journal. 1, 2, 3, and then I'll cut it. I like to save these scissors just for this purpose because they stay nice and sharp. And then we'll just thread that through the needle. Usually easier said than done. Here's our threaded needle. So I'm going to just check to make sure I have the top of my pages at the top of my finished journal. And we're going to start from the middle. So we're going to push that all the way through using the holes that we created. There we go. And then we'll sew it to our cover. All right, now as I pull this through, I want to make sure that I leave some here. So that looks pretty good. And I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to come back up to the top, and we're going to go from the outside in on the top. So we've got our cover here. And then we're going to pull it through our signature into the holes that we made. Here. Out of the way, we don't need that right now. Okay, so I can see that this is pretty tight. And a little more here. I think I had some in the middle. Okay, so just checking to make sure it's pretty snug and we're still lined up right where we want to be. And then we're going to come through from, that was the top. So we're going to push it through the bottom of our signature pages where we've made the holes. Pull it through here. And then I'm going to put it through the bottom of my folder. Right, make that hole. Okay. Now I have the wax twine, which is really nice. You don't have to use it, but it does make it a little bit easier to get the thread through the pages, especially if you start working with a little bit of a more, I don't know what to say, like a more solid or a harder cover than just a single piece of paper. So if you were using a cardboard box that was recycled and trying to go through that, then you're going to be very glad that you have the wax twine. So we're going back through that hole again and pulling it right up through the middle. So now I can get that twine out of my needle, and I'm just going to put that away so I don't lose it. And now I can fidget and adjust the signature inside of my cover to make sure it's tight. And I'm going to also make sure that I have one side of this thread on one side of the ends on one side of the twine that runs through the middle, and then the other side, the other end on the other side, so that it looks like this. Okay, so now, like I said, we can fidget with it and just make it a little bit tighter. those look pretty tight. So the last thing I'm going to do is tie a knot right into the middle of my twine. And once I've tied a knot, I can tie a fancy bow and then even out the ends. Now, if you wanted to, you could do this the opposite and have your bow on the outside of your book, kind of like how it looks in the middle right here. So there we go. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'll just even these off. And we'll take off the clips. And our signature is done. And it's sewn into our booklet. So here we go. Here is our handmade journal, otherwise known as a junk journal. And we have our pockets here where we can tuck little tags, notebooks, and things like that. And then you have your pages to embellish, some pages for writing in, and you could certainly write on these. And as I embellish this, I'm probably going to leave some space in the middle to write on the antique pages that I've painted. But we can flip through and see all the pages. And look, here's our coffee dyed paper, and it even looks antiqued. It's got a little tear in it, which gives it a little bit of character. And some of our writing pages. And as we flip through, we see all the pages that we've created and our signature right in the middle, and we have our 20-page journal. So let's come back with the papers that we stamped, and we will glue down the cover. So I think I'm going to start with the back, and I'm just going to add this plain piece to the back. You can embellish it if you want. I think I'm going to leave mine plain. And I'm just going to add my little bead of glue right around the edges. And some in the middle, just to give it a nice stick. And because it's thick, I'm going to use my bone folder just to make sure it's pressed down nicely. And then here is our front cover with our adorable little fairy. Okay, and there we have it, our handmade junk journal using Seren, some wild flowers. We have our antique papers that we have covered with our Lavinia chalk paints, our notebook pages, and again, I might come in with a little bit of distress ink just to soften that up, and so to make it a little bit darker so it blends in better. I have my coffee stained paper, all of my pages, they all fit nicely into my journal, and our project is complete. Thanks for joining me today, and if you decide to give this a go and make your own, I would love to see it if you could share it in our Del Bello's Facebook groups. We have our Del Bello's Designs Lounge where we use primarily Lavinia products, and we also have Del Bello's a la carte for the other Del Bello's stamps and items from this shop. So please join us and share your projects there. Thanks for coming today. Have a great afternoon.